Marianne Holloway was dying, but Victor Holloway was the one who should have been afraid. What began as a marriage built on trust and devotion unraveled into a web of betrayal, calculated deception, and a final act so cold it would leave an entire town whispering her name long after both of them were buried. Marianne Holloway had always believed she was living a charmed life. She had the kind of marriage that looked perfect from the outside. A well-kept home, a husband who provided for her, and a circle of friends who envied the way Victor's arm always seemed to rest protectively on her shoulder at gatherings. But beneath the soft glow of their shared life, cracks were beginning to form. They were small at first, the kind that could be ignored or explained away, until the day everything changed in a sterile, white-walled doctor's office. The air felt heavy as the oncologist's words cut through the stillness. Stage 4. Ovarian cancer. It was aggressive. It was terminal. There was no sugarcoating it. No miracle treatment that could reverse what had already spread through her body. In that moment, Marianne felt the ground disappear beneath her feet. The days that followed became a blur of hospital visits, tests, and whispered discussions about treatment plans that carried more hope than certainty. Her body, once graceful and strong, began to betray her. She woke each morning feeling weaker, her energy stolen by a disease she could not see but could feel in every aching joint and trembling muscle. Yet through it all, she told herself that Victor would be her anchor, the one constant in the storm. That was what marriage meant, being there when the other person was at their lowest, holding on even when the future was uncertain. At first, he seemed to try. He drove her to appointments, sat with her in waiting rooms, brought her tea when she couldn't get out of bed. But something in his eyes began to change. It wasn't just worry, there was something else there, something she couldn't quite name. His phone was always in his pocket or turned face down on the table. When she asked simple questions, his answers were short, distracted. She told herself it was stress, that he was processing her diagnosis in his own way. But deep down, an unease began to grow. The nights felt longer, the house colder. She would sit by the window and watch the driveway, listening for the sound of his car, feeling the sharp sting in her chest when the hours ticked by with no sign of him. Even when he was home, he seemed distant, his mind elsewhere. The warmth of his touch had been replaced by a kind of mechanical kindness, a polite duty rather than affection. It was as though her illness had not only stolen her health, but had stolen him too. Marianne wanted to believe it was temporary, that once they both adjusted to this new reality, they would find their way back to each other. But a quiet voice inside her whispered otherwise. It told her that something had shifted between them in a way that could never be undone. That the man who had promised to stand by her side in sickness and in health was already slipping away. And as much as the cancer terrified her, the thought of facing the end alone was far more unbearable. It began with the smallest details. Things that, at first, could be dismissed as coincidence. A faint, sweet scent on Victor's shirt that did not belong to any perfume Marianne owned. A smear of lipstick on the edge of a coffee cup left in his car. She told herself these were nothing more than harmless traces of his day. Perhaps from brushing past someone in a crowd or sharing a table with a coworker. But the explanations she crafted in her mind grew weaker with each passing week. He began showering as soon as he came home, as though eager to wash something away before she could get too close. His phone, once left charging on the kitchen counter, became an extension of his hand, guarded like a secret. When it rang, he would step outside or retreat into another room, his voice low and urgent. Marianne's illness made it easy for him to explain his absences. He told her he was working late to cover the medical bills, meeting clients in the evenings, or networking over drinks. She wanted to believe him. Needed to believe him because to do otherwise was to admit that her world was not only crumbling under the weight of cancer, but also under the betrayal of the man she trusted most. Yet, the evidence was slowly stacking against him. One rainy afternoon, a close friend came to visit, bringing with her a quiet storm of truth. She had seen Victor at a downtown restaurant, sitting across from a young woman with striking features and a dress that clung to her like a second skin. They weren't just sharing a meal. They were leaning close, speaking in a way that suggested intimacy. His hand rested over the woman's fingers, brushing in a lingering way that made Marianne's stomach twist. Her friend's voice was hesitant, almost apologetic, but her eyes told Marianne she was certain of what she had seen. That night, Marianne lay awake, staring at the ceiling as the sound of rain tapped against the window. She thought of the vows they had exchanged, the promises spoken with such conviction. She remembered the early years when Victor looked at her as though she were the only person in the room. Now, she realized, that gaze had shifted elsewhere. She didn't confront him. Confrontation was direct, emotional, and left room for denial. Instead, she chose to watch. When he left the house, she noted the times. When he returned, she noted the excuses. She began searching through his pockets when he was in the shower, finding hotel receipts tucked into the folds of his wallet, a lipstick-stained napkin crumpled inside his coat. Each discovery was like a blade twisting deeper. Yet oddly, the pain was sharpening her resolve rather than breaking her. Marianne understood something about herself in those quiet, painful hours. She was dying. Yes, but she was not powerless. Her illness had stripped away her physical strength, but her mind was still sharp, and her will still unyielding. If Victor thought her too weak to see what was happening, he was mistaken. She had no intention of fading quietly into the background while he built a life with someone else. No, she would watch him, learn every detail, and when the time came, she would act. Marianne began to move through her days with a deliberate calm, masking the turmoil inside her. To Victor, she appeared to be the frail, compliant wife, focused only on her treatments and rest. In reality, every moment was part of a quiet, meticulous preparation. She understood that if she wanted to make her final act count, her first step was information. Knowledge was power, and she intended to know everything about the woman who had taken her husband's attention. The private investigator she hired was discreet, delivering manila envelopes filled with photographs, timestamps, and written reports. Marianne learned the woman's name, her workplace, the routes she took home. She even discovered the small, upscale apartment where they met when Victor didn't risk a public setting. Each detail etched itself into Marianne's mind, forming a map of betrayal. While she gathered proof, she also began to reconfigure her financial landscape. She met with her attorney under the guise of updating her will, ensuring that assets would be shielded from Victor in the event of her death. Bank accounts were shifted into trusts. Valuables were locked away in a safe deposit box, and certain life insurance clauses were adjusted to her benefit. She knew Victor would expect to inherit freely, for once she was gone, she wanted to make certain his expectations would be shattered. But her planning did not end with money. Marianne spent long nights at her desk, her thin fingers turning pages of medical journals and pharmacology guides. She wasn't looking for a violent solution, nothing that would raise suspicion immediately. She needed something that could pass as a complication of her illness, something subtle enough to weave into a final shared moment without leaving glaring evidence. Her research eventually led her to rare substances, naturally occurring toxins that mimicked the symptoms of advanced cancer. They could be slipped into a drink or a meal and would leave behind nothing but a trail of assumptions. The idea didn't frighten her. Instead, it gave her a sense of control she hadn't felt since her diagnosis. She thought about the irony, how the man who had vowed to love her in sickness would find himself sitting across from her, in what he believed was a gesture of peace, only to drink the last glass he would ever touch. Still, she was patient. Timing mattered. She needed him relaxed, unsuspecting, convinced she had accepted his betrayal as just another part of life's cruelty. Marianne practiced her mask every day, softening her voice, smiling when she wanted to scream, thanking him for small gestures she knew were born from guilt rather than love. She let him believe her too weak to question him, too focused on her own decline to notice the distance between them. Inside, her determination burned brighter than ever. Her body was failing her, but her mind had become sharper, colder. She was not simply waiting for death, she was preparing for it, shaping it into something deliberate, something that would carry her name in whispers long after she was gone. The night Marianne had been planning for finally arrived. She chose it carefully, one of those rare evenings when Victor's schedule was free, when the mistress was out of town, according to the investigator's most recent report. She wanted him all to herself, no distractions, no easy escape. The house was quiet, the rain outside steady and rhythmic, a soft percussion against the windows. She took her time preparing, slipping into a silk gown she hadn't worn in years, the pale fabric draping over her frail frame. Her illness had stolen the fullness from her face, but her eyes still held a glimmer that could catch attention. And tonight, they would hold his. She set the dining table with their best china, the heavy silverware polished to a gleam. Candles lined the center, their flames flickering against crystal glasses. A bottle of wine, his favorite, stood at the ready. The meal had been ordered earlier in the day, carefully plated to look home-cooked. In one of the glasses, she poured a measured amount of the substance she had procured weeks earlier. It dissolved instantly, leaving no trace, no color, no scent, just a silent promise of what was to come. She left the other glass untouched. Her own fate had already been sealed by the cancer eating her from within, and she didn't need to share his poison to join him in death. But there was something poetic in the idea of them finishing the evening together, two lives ending side by side for entirely different reasons. When Victor walked through the door, the warmth and candlelight seemed to disarm him. He looked almost startled to see her dressed up, the table set like it had been in the early days of their marriage. For a moment, he hesitated in the doorway, his eyes scanning the scene as if unsure whether to be touched or suspicious. She greeted him with a soft smile, her voice steady, inviting him to sit. They began to eat, the clink of cutlery against porcelain filling the silence between them. Halfway through the meal, she told him she knew everything. There was no anger in her tone, only certainty, like someone reading from a script already memorized. She spoke of the nights he disappeared. The woman's name, the hotel rooms, the dinners in the city. His expression shifted not to guilt, but to something far colder. He didn't deny it. Instead, a faint smirk played at his lips, as if her illness made her words harmless, as if she couldn't possibly touch the life he'd built outside of her. Marianne lifted her glass, her eyes locked on his. She toasted to their final night together, the words soft but deliberate. She drank, letting the wine slide over her tongue, and watched as he mirrored her, draining the poisoned glass without hesitation. Minutes later, his face paled, his confident posture unraveling as his breath came shallow and strained. He reached for the table, his fingers trembling, confusion flashing in his eyes. Marianne simply sat back, her gaze calm, watching him crumble under the weight of her silent revenge. the candle flames swaying in the stillness between his last breaths. By morning, the rain had stopped, leaving the neighborhood wrapped in a strange, heavy stillness. When a neighbor, concerned after seeing no movement since the previous evening, knocked and received no answer, she called the police. Officers arrived just after sunrise, their boots echoing on the porch before they pushed open the unlocked front door. Inside, the air was thick with the lingering scent of extinguished candles and cold wine. The dining room was frozen in time. 2 plates on the table, a half-finished meal, and the bodies of Victor and Marianne slumped in their chairs, as if sleep had claimed them mid-conversation. To the responding officers, the scene seemed at first like a tragic love story. A dying wife, her husband by her side, both gone together in the quiet of the night. Paramedics checked pulses they already knew would not be there, their faces betraying no surprise. The medical examiner's team arrived soon after, covering the bodies and preparing them for transport. The initial theory was simple. Marianne's illness had reached its inevitable end, and Victor, in grief or solidarity, had joined her, perhaps through some quiet, shared agreement. But, as the hours passed, small details began to pull at the edges of that tidy narrative. A detective noticed that Marianne's wine glass was nearly full, while Victor's was empty. Another noted that the food on Victor's plate was gone, while Marianne's remained mostly untouched. In the kitchen, the unopened second bottle of wine sat beside a torn receipt from a chemical supplier. An odd find in the home of a cancer patient. Though subtle, the inconsistencies began to stack up. The toxicology report arrived within days, and it told a far darker story. Victor's system contained a rare plant-based toxin, one known for its ability to mimic symptoms of advanced illness and heart failure. Marianne, however, showed no trace of it. Her death had been entirely due to the cancer that had consumed her. The conclusion was unavoidable. The wife had poisoned the husband. What could not be proven, at least in the official record, was intent. The whispers around town, however, filled in the blanks. People who had once seen Marianne as a quiet, graceful presence now spoke of her with hushed awe. Some called her a murderer, cold and calculating, even in her final days. Others saw her as a wronged woman who refused to leave the world powerless, taking the man who betrayed her into the grave beside her. Friends recalled the spark in her eyes when she spoke in those last weeks, the kind of quiet resolve that could only belong to someone who had made peace with their decision. The case closed quickly. There was no suspect left to question, no trial to be had. Victor was buried beside Marianne, their names carved into the same stone, an irony not lost on those who knew the truth. For years after, the story lingered in the town's memory, passed along in murmurs at dinner parties and over coffee in corner cafes. It became a cautionary tale, a reminder that even the weakest hand can hold the power to end a game if played at the right moment. And in Marianne Holloway's case, that moment had been her own carefully chosen final night.